Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. That was Fix You by Coldplay, and we normally shouldn't be playing music like that because it'll get you, not usually a strike, but it'll get you a, whatever. Anyways, I was in the mood. I particularly like that song, and so thank you all for indulging me. Lance, how are you?
I'm doing okay.
I should get the fire going. There's the fire. Oh. Yeah, and exactly. Yeah,
chilly night.
Oh dear Lord! I was thinking earlier too. Listen, there's shit going on in the world. We cover Ukraine, which really sucks and is depressing in many times, especially some of the you've seen the the explicit channel, and we've had discussions about some of the worst stuff that's going on over there. So it's hard, but on the flip side, I'm so lucky that I get to do this show, and we do the news sections, but also that you and I can just hang out, shoot the shit for an hour, 90 minutes, and decompress a little bit. So it's, thank you so much for coming. I always enjoy it.
Appreciate it. It's refreshing for me too. So
let's see.
I like my new name, by the way.
Oh, jeez. Oh, God. I still have the other... It's one of these days I'll not fuck something up before starting the show, so
well,
that's still...
got 3 of the 5 letters correct. I mean...
That's look at the bright side. Great. That's perfect.
Well, dude.
Yeah. If I was a monkey throwing feces at an eye chart, I'd have been probably just about as close, so great. Apparently a monkey could do my job. It's so nice having you. Did I say, you know what? All right. Thank you all. It's been a great show. We're gonna close this up. There goes the fire. There goes Lance. I think we're done. It's been a great show all. Thank you. All right. Well, why don't I fix the name before I get distracted?
Don't worry about it. I was just kidding.
I know, but you know what? I like to try to have it right.
I've been called a lot worse.
Oh dear Lord! All right, there we go. Nice thing is, it's easy enough to fix. Oh, but the fire went out. Look at that. How many people can get a fire to just stop in place? So
impressive.
Yep. So that was
the new Avengers movie, Firestopper.
Firestopper. Just so yeah, I like that. That's like an orchestral version of Fix You, and I actually heard it best done on a show called The Newsroom, which I really like, by Aaron Sorkin. But I had never heard of Coldplay before. My wife took me to a whole bunch of concerts. I really liked them, and so I was talking to Dick Dawson, who's on the Shills, and he's been helping us out, and you and I have been on his channel any number of times, and he's like, so Nick, tell me a band you like. I said, I really like Coldplay, and he's like, oh fuck, I hate them. I was like, how can you hate them? I mean, give me a go. He goes, every song, they go, pick a song, any song, it's whiny crap. And I was just like, okay, it is whiny, I'll admit. It's like, now I like their songs just a little bit less. Thanks, Dick, I really appreciate that. So I did the orchestral version, which is a little less whiny.
I'm going to have to find something for you to put on for me sometime.
Yep. We'll pick something. Yeah. What are you interested in?
Oh, I have very varied tastes.
Eminem, Dr. Dre.
Yes. Not so much.
My eldest loved Eminem.
I remember when I was in Bahrain in the lead up to the war, we went to some party, and most of the people were, oh, you got to hear this music. And the Marine Lieutenant Colonel, who was kind of my partner in the planning section at the time, said, here's one of my favorites. He put it on. It was Eminem, and I hadn't heard a lot of Eminem, but I said, wow, that's great. And everybody else in the room is like staring at us like we're diseased or something.
Eminem, I think, is a genius. I don't say that lightly. I don't toss that lightly. But if you listen to something like "Not Afraid," which is not his best song by any stretch of the imagination, but if you understand the lyrics and you look at the puns, and everything is a pun on a pun on a pun, usually layered on top of each other. So at one point he's talking about, and I forget who it wasn't Dr. Dre, but it was another rapper that he was getting into an argument with, and he said, the guy was supposed to go to jail. Which one of them
hasn't he gotten in an argument?
No. One of them was about to go to jail, and the guy ended up getting out of it. The guy ended up getting out of it, at least temporarily, by saying he had to get dental work done. And so Eminem is making fun of this, and said, okay, you thought you were king, you lied through your teeth, a pun right there, and now instead of getting crowned, you're getting capped, meaning it's like okay, yeah,
oh yeah, I mean, it's like how many puns can you throw into a single sentence?
But you have to know the history, and you have to know what he's talking about to realize. And I was like, that takes genius level intellect. You can hate the guy. You can hate his politics or all this, and is he flawed? But that is a genius level intellect. And then he plays with accents, and he went over the top with that, but then he says, in Not Afraid too, he says, I went too far with that, and he suddenly, just for one word, drops into a Jamaican accent, and then just drops right out again. And I was, holy shit. Yeah. I played it for my my eldest.
The other one that floored people when I said I liked it was Marilyn Manson.
Really?
Yeah.
I've only heard a couple of Marilyn Manson songs. I liked them good enough. I certainly didn't. There isn't a lot of songs I don't like. I'm trying to think. I know there's a few. I can't even think right now of like what I really strongly object to. Oh God, don't tell me. I loathe, and I'm sorry because I know there are people who really like her. I loathe Bjork. She's whiny, raspy. I don't get the music. I don't get the lyrics. I don't get the patterns in the none of it, and it's like nails on a chalkboard to me.
Yeah.
But so there's a couple I don't like, but really there's very little music that I yeah. There you go. All right, we'll find something to play for you. What a lot of people don't realize, and this has been fun doing on In Time. We get demonetized. You can blame Titan for part of this. So we get demonetized a lot. And the reason is because we show very explicit things, and we have explicit conversations about difficult topics that you can't show to younger audiences, and a lot of advertisers don't want to advertise on that, so we end up getting demonetized. Half our shows get demonetized, which is why we really appreciate super chats and patrons and all that other stuff, because the ad revenue doesn't cut it. And when we're covering live riots, it's like, okay, advertisers we just lost our advertisers when we're covering the Ukraine war or anything like that. Genocide, just by saying genocide, we've probably been demonetized. So. Yeah. What people don't realize is about 90% of music you can actually play without getting a copyright strike, because the big major music companies have made deals and have licensing done with YouTube, so that if a YouTube channel plays it, all that happens is you automatically trigger the license. You then have the license to use it, but all your ad revenue goes to them. So they actually like it when you do it. Well, so what I do is, if there's a show that we're going to get demonetized, and Titan was just like, why don't you just play 12, if you're going to get demonetized anyway, play U2, play Queen, David Bowie, I was like, that's a great idea. So like on shows that we're going to get demonetized, I'm just like, I'll play whatever I want. You got to be a little careful, because there's 10% of songs that are not licensed that way, and you will get a strike if you play it. So every song I test beforehand. I got a dummy channel. I play the song on the channel and see, do I get a strike or do I get a claim? That's it. That's the other one. The claim is, it's just they've claimed it. You can license it. It's already automatically licensed. Your revenue goes to them. So the ad revenue, you keep the super chats. So I look, do I get a claim or do I get a strike? So I test every song, but for the most part, 95% of music, yeah, no problem. And since we get demonetized anyway. Yeah, what?
We've got to use the Trololo song when we do Starsky next time.
Trololo?
Oh, you haven't seen it?
No.
Oh my God.
Oh, dear. Apparently I missed something.
It's freaking hilarious. I don't know what year. I'm guessing, given the fashions and everything, it's probably late 60s, early 70s. And it was a song done on the, I don't know, Russian equivalent of, American Bandstand, so Russian Bandstand or whatever. And it is just so god-awful cheesy. I mean, you could make pizza off of that song for decades. It's so hilarious. And it would be funny to put it on when Starsky's there to see if he figures out what it is.
Oh, that may be worth it. That may be worth it. Let me look into that and see. The one I often play with him is "Prayer for Ukraine" by the 𝗢𝗍𝗆 light opera. Yeah.
Yeah, and that brings a tear to your eye. It's hard not to.
Oh my God! And so I play that all the time. The problem is there's actually two versions of it, and they're almost indistinguishable. They were both done live. One is fair use, and anybody can play it. The other is copyrighted by NBC because it was played on Saturday Night Live, and if they think it's that one, you get a copyright strike. They take the channel down. So I played it about 10 or 15 times, and one of them got that strike. And I was just like, whoa, what's going on? And I'm talking to them about it. They're like, oh, this is from NBC. I was like, no, it's not. This is the free version. And I listened to both, and I was just like, oh shit, they sound identical. You can tell they're not quite the same, but it's the same group singing the same song in two different settings. And you know, you've heard me bitch about this before, which is it's just like, if we sit there and repeat something Trump said so that we can debunk it, just by repeating it, we get hit with a strike for misinformation, and we have to combat the thing. So it's sort of like it's a pain in the neck just being extra careful, but a stitch in time. It's easier to be just a little extra careful than to have to fight this stuff, even if you win most of the time. So I don't play that song anymore. I love that one, and I may play it again. And I liked playing it when Starsky came on because.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for obvious reasons. And we're lucky to have Starsky. We're lucky to have him on. I think he enjoys the show. He's plugged the show to other people. So it's not just something where he's, just showing up for and I enjoy challenging him. I enjoy how he challenges us. And just out of dignity and respect and out of some acknowledgement for the fact that he's suffering and I'm not, I like to play that song for him when he comes on. But yeah. Oh dear Lord, that, and we've got the I don't even see. So Mars is the guy. He's let's see. Mars is. My brain is not working. Oh, thank you, Titan. Titan sent me the song. Now, this is where I'm stuck because it's like, do I play it or not? Now, if it was in the 70s, it's actually got to be free. Well, I'll hold on to it, but he sent me the thing. So I've got it now. It's Soviet, so so I shouldn't have a problem. Okay, well now I'll get this into the thing and we'll play it in a second. Thank you, Titan.
I wonder, do copyrights from a specific country last beyond the existence of that country? That's a good question.
That's a very good question. So, in the U.S., a copyright lasts for 50 years. It can be refreshed by any number of different things, and then when it's refreshed, it lasts an extra duration. But in general, it's 50 years. Now, if the person who did the song dies 2 days after the copyright starts, it still lasts 50 years.
Oh, yeah.
So I have to believe it would be similar for a country. But I also believe that for the country, who's going to enforce it? If nobody enforces the copyright, it's the same thing as there's no copyright.
Well, equally pertinent, did it ever get copyrighted by them?
That's a good question. Well, and here's the
good loyal communists. Why are they going to work within the capitalist system?
I said earlier that I like the newsroom, right? There's a great scene. The newsroom was an Aaron Sorkin thing. In the beginning, there's a scene where the main character is talking about America is not the greatest country in the world anymore.
Oh, I love that speech.
I love it. We've got it. We've got it on the thing. We played it for a show, but I had edited out just a few little tidbits to streamline it and make it ideal for the show. When I played it, I got the rights to it. YouTube gave me the rights to it. So now, so now I get notifications every day of other channels playing that clip and saying, do I want to strike them for playing my content? That's friggin' HBO, but because I edited it and made it somewhat custom, they didn't correctly identify that it's HBO, so now they're saying it's mine, and I have the opportunity to strike, and I get them every day. It's right on my dashboard. It says this channel in France just played your content, and I look, and it's not In Time's content. They don't even know In Time exists. It's the HBO content, and either they edited it similarly to how we played it or whatever. That's how screwy the system is. So this this video may be, quote, copyrighted by another channel. Whichever channel plays it first.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now it doesn't mean it's actually, but it's just another one.
All those highly popular Pol Pot music videos, we can't play them now.
Yeah. Oh dear, it's a nightmare.
It is a holiday in Cambodia.
I think I'm going to play at least a little bit of it anyway.
Did that one fly right over your head?
Yes, it did. It's a holiday in Cambodia. Okay. You said. But
the name of a song from, I think it's the Dead Kennedys.
Okay. Yep. Over my head. So I do love just the, and I got to admit, every now and then I'm just like, and there's a French channel. I couldn't read a thing. It's all in French. It's saying, what they're doing. I was just like, I just kind of feel like striking them. It's like, hey, that's my content.
I feel like being an asshole today. Ta-da!
Well, it's France. I mean, come on.
Okay. Just sitting there with your galwasses telling you that you cannot do this to us.
It doesn't. It's Titan's being a smartass and pointing out the faults in my. Yeah. It's a lot less funny when he.
More bizarre conversation we've ever had.
It's. I mean, and you. Obviously, you get how it works. Whoever plays it first. It's just
yeah.
Oh dear Lord. That's why I'm a little more inclined to play music like that on overtime, because it's not monetized. It can still get struck, but it's not monetized.
So, shall we talk about the giant circular white elephant flying over the room?
The one that was shot down, or were you thinking another one?
Oh, there's dozens of them. Everybody's got them. You're not a somebody until you have your own personal Chinese reconnaissance balloon flying over your house.
I guess they're saying now one of them may have been a hobbyist, like a hobbyist group. I think Titan dropped it on our Discord. It may have been a hobbyist
Chinese
group.
Hobbyist.
No. The first one was the Chinese. So frankly, I think they should sue. I mean, you can't send an F-22 after a civilian aircraft. They shot down a civilian aircraft. It was a bunch of hobbyists who just did sue the U.S. government. It's like, okay, you know what? Fine. I thought that was funny.
I tend to agree with you. The reaction here is reminiscent of the hair on fire nonsense that went on when Sputnik first went up. I mean, literally, Here's a little iron ball with a thing that goes beep. That's all Sputnik did, is go beep. And oh my God, you read the stuff that came out at the time that was up there. It was like the world was ending. Commies were invading, every coast at the same time. It's just like, so they got balloons going over us. Well, they've had civil airliners flying over us. They've had satellites flying over us. Who gives a damn if they've got balloons going over us? And it's been going on apparently for decades.
Well, that's sort of the answer that I gave. And then somebody said, no, they haven't been doing it. We'd always have shot it down. And it's sort of like, well, no, because you
have to know they're there. And apparently some of the information that's come out is the radars weren't calibrated to look for something like that.
Well, and because there's also satellites and there's, 100,000 different ways that they can do it, and we take precautions against being able to be seen by satellite or balloon or so on and so forth. It's like, by the time you're done with all the trouble finding it, making sure it's not civilian, making sure you know what you're shooting at, then shoot it down, and then it's sort of like, what exactly are you accomplishing? So for the most part, we just let them go has been my understanding of sort of how this, and the only reason we shot this first one down was because it's like the American public noticed it and then was like, oh my God, what are you doing about it? And Biden's like, I'll take care of this.
Commies!
Oh,
yeah. Idiots on parade.
Oh, well, I told you, I used to get into arguments on Twitter all the time. That was years ago. I haven't done it in a while, but I've been getting into it with a whole bunch of them. And one guy was just like, the U.S. is about to get nuked. And I was just like, well, who's going to nuke us? Like, oh, it'll be Russia or China, U.S. is over. And he's just laughing his ass off. And I was like, is this a troll or does he really believe this? I looked, he really believes it. And I was just like, well, wait a minute. How, are they going to take out our missiles? And
dude.
I'm just sitting there going like, have you ever heard of the nuclear triad? Are they going to find all 12 Ohio-class submarines that are capable of wiping an entire country off the face of the, it's just like, they have intelligence. They know where they all are. I was like, we don't know where they all are. They let the Ohios, my understanding is they'll just tell an Ohio to go and they just go wherever they want and they're under one. Nobody can find them. Nobody knows where they are. And they can nuke an entire country.
Draw a big box on the map and say, anywhere in here is fine. And when I mean big box, I mean big box.
So finally I was just like, oh, dear Lord. I was like, okay. So I was like, so basically, I was like, if anybody nukes us, it's probably basically the end of the world because we're going to retaliate and yada, yada, yada. Like, no, they'll nuke you before you can retaliate. I was like, okay, so you're going to take out all the strategic bombers that are in the air. You're going to take out all the submarines that are in the water. You're going to also, by the way, you're going to have to nuke Turkey, France, the Netherlands, which are as part of NATO, hosting missiles of ours. So they're going to take out all of them.
And Britain and France, who have their own nuclear arsenals.
Who are required to retaliate based on Article 5. So I was like, I'm really curious. I was like, please explain this to me. I am all ears. You have my undivided attention.
Will have all the sexy girls in his secret bunker in the Urals, and while the rest of us are dying atop, he'll be breeding the new Soviet man to take over the world. I mean, what utter bunk.
Oh, God. It was an interesting discussion. The guy finally, hold on one second. The guy, why did this not? Oh, okay. The guy, that and one other guy who was all basically Russia. He said, oh, Russia's only lost 5,000 troops. The rest is propaganda. They're wiping out Ukraine and this war is almost over. I was like, wait a minute.
The 5,000 number is propaganda. Let's be honest here.
That's the Russian number, is that the Russians' current stance is that they've lost 5,000. And I was like, okay, well, no, he said the rest was propaganda. So he said any number that's not 5,000 is propaganda. And so I was just like, wait a minute. So they've only lost on average 13 troops a day? I was like, yeah. And I was just like, well, then how is it that they haven't been able to take Bakhmut yet? How is it that they had to, and he's just like, well, they retreated from Kiev because that was a feint to make taking the Donbass easier. And I was just like, wait a minute, if you're only losing 13 troops a day out of 400,000, it should be pretty easy to take them. It's just like, what is
I'm
Ukraine using rubber bands?
Guess as to what color ball cap this guy loves to wear.
Yes, and you would be correct.
Give me a moment. It's going to be a hard guess.
Okay, sorry. Let me.
Probably not blue.
No. Well, and then he had a buddy who came in, and the guy was all engaging with me, and he was just like, okay, well, this is how things are. And he clearly knows nothing about anything. And again, one of them was just like, I was like, do you have any idea Google the nuclear triad. Once you've read that, then get back to me. But, so I was talking to the other one, and he's starting to talk like war strategy and tactics, and I was just like, this is the dumbest shit I've ever heard. Now, I was never an expert on it, and I've learned a lot more just talking to you. But even before I met you, I knew enough to know that this guy had no idea what he was talking about. So I'm trying to figure out how and why.
Well, you don't play Call of Duty as much as he does, so obviously he's better educated on these things.
That was it. I decided to look on his timeline, and first of all, he's like, I believe in facts, not feelings. Gamer and this and that. I was like, what games does he play? And he's just like, I just got the new Modern Warfare. Here are some glitches with the graphics card, but other than that, it's a great game. And he's just doing Modern Warfare, and it's all Modern Warfare runs. And I'm sitting there going like, oh, he plays Modern Warfare, so he can tell me why Russia is going to win in Ukraine. And then there was an actual tweet from some Russian either newspaper or something that said, Russia is calling on all patriots and volunteers. And he said, I will volunteer. And I was like, first of all, I don't believe that you'll volunteer. And second of all, I was just like, what, your qualification is going to be you play call. Actually, if he's going to be joining the Russian military, that probably makes him pretty well qualified. It's like, how many months have you been playing Call of Duty? 6. Come on, to join us.
You got a direct appointment to Master Sergeant.
And like I said, it's not often that I indulge in the trolls because it's not healthy either. You get agitated.
As somebody pointed out, and I don't remember which blogger this was, but he said each successive wave of Russian mobilization, conscription, whatever, the quality gets worse and worse and worse. So how that's going to change the dynamic when their experienced people are dying in droves and you're getting more and more inexperienced people who have pre-existing health issues, mental issues, that kind of stuff.
Yep.
You're left scratching your head at how they can arrive at this logic. And the casualty figure, 5,000. Okay, we all know that's ridiculous, but I could buy somebody arguing the question of, are we talking about 100,000, 120,000, or 150,000 dead? Those are numbers that are pretty much in debate among rational sources, but 5,000 is absurd.
Oh yeah.
And but the fact that these people are glomming onto it as if it's God's truth handed down from the mountain on stone tablets just leaves you wondering as to, did you manage to graduate from high school? How about middle school?
Well, and the way I know they're not trolls is because when and a couple of them, I just locked in, and I was just like, okay, please, I'd really like to understand this. Explain to me how they're only losing 13 a day, but they had to give up taking Kyiv to make it, quote, easier to take Donbass. If you're losing 13 a day out of 400,000 in the middle of a war, what is your kill ratio there? 1 to 1,000 or something like that? Why is it taking them so long? Oh, well, it's a war of attrition. Wait a minute. What? He's trying to drain the West by having them put all these resources into it. That's unhinged. And I'm just sitting there going like, okay, well, and I used Afghanistan.
But it's not draining Russia. Oh, no.
Yeah, no. Well, listen, if they're killing them at 1,000 to 1, and I was just like, could you answer me this then? Why is he using T-72s or older? He's just opened up factories to start making more tanks again. So yeah, he's taking it seriously. He's manufacturing T-62s. How is it that a T-62 is, in your view, competing with modern NATO tanks? And so I asked a whole bunch of these questions, and they finally just stopped. And that's usually what happens when it's a legit person and they've been argued into where they just have to be completely unhinged to keep the argument going. And they're just like, okay, you clearly don't understand, and they mute you. So it's just, okay, so it's not trolls per se. These guys really believe it. Part of it is there's always been people like this on social media. That's kind of what social media exists for. I think it's worse now under Musk. So I think that's another part of it. I think another part of it is people who want to espouse vile ideology. And I don't think it's vile per se to say that Russia's only lost 5,000. But I think it's vile to say that this is what Ukraine deserves or any... Yeah, but there was other vile stuff associated with it. Anyone who thinks it's just 5,000 believes all the other... I mean, he was sitting... the other one that I got hit with is... Oh, God. The Democrats are, modern Democrats are trying to help CEOs get more wealthy, and the reason is because they're socialists. I have that on Twitter. Wow. And they hit me with the usual, the KKK was started by...
The mental gymnastics you have to use to come up with that line of thought are just, that's impressive. I mean, this guy should try out for the Olympics in absurd leaping through your own ass.
Well, and I went through the basic spiel. There's nuance to it, but for the most part, I think it's a defensible point to say that 100 years ago, the Republicans were the liberal party and the Democrats were the conservative party. When you take a look at FDR, FDR was a liberal, but he was a Republican. When you take a look at, the Republicans, Charles Sumner, who was instrumental in not the Anti-Slave Act, but essentially the one that, oh my God, Charles Sumner, what was it that he did? It was and then Andrew Johnson repealed it.
Slave Act?
No, it was the Civil Rights. I think it was the Civil Rights Act. It was Charles Sumner, who was a Republican, Andrew Johnson, a conservative Democrat, vetoed it, and then, quote, radical liberal Republicans in Congress overrode the veto. When the Democrats founded the KKK, which they absolutely did, they were conservatives. And if you look at the founding documents, and if you look at what Democrats were saying at that time, they were for states' rights. They were for the government staying out of, everything that you would find in a current Republican talking point memo. And I was just like, so, yes, it's true that most of the best legislation that came out of this country, in my view, was put up by Republicans. But they were liberals. That includes giving women the right to vote and all this. It was Republicans, but they were liberals. So you have to be a little careful just saying, the Republicans are, X, Y, and Z. And they're like, no, the Republicans, the Democrats are racist. They think that blacks...
sometime in about the 1930s, the parties do a flip.
Yeah, they say it took about 40 years, but yeah, they started to flip. And that's about when... Yeah. And I showed an electoral map, too, because the other thing is, since the dawn of time, going back through the Greeks, cities have always been liberal and rural areas have always been conservative. And there's any number of psychological reasons why this happens, but it's a universal constant for the human species. So the coasts, where you have Boston, Los Angeles, the major areas.
All the major metropolitan.
Liberal, since going back since the founding of this country. But if you take a look at an electoral map, and they're easy enough to get. In fact, 360 to Win carries electoral maps for every single presidential election. You go back to ones from 100 years ago. Texas is blue. California, Massachusetts, red. They're still the same, conservative and liberal ideologies, but they're not the Democrats. Anyway, so I dropped these maps. And I said, here you go. And there is nuance to this, by the way.
Color of the underwear changed, that's all.
Yep. So, anyway, so I said, why don't you come up with a modern example of how Democrats are racist? And the first thing that this lady said was, well, they try to do all this legislation to, quote, help minorities, and that's because they think minorities are infants who can't take care of themselves. Black people in this country can take care of themselves. They don't need any help. They don't need any legislation to protect their rights. They're just like this and that. And I was just like, well, ideally, you'd be correct. But statistically speaking, we know that if a black guy and a white guy have the same resume and they both try to get a job or a loan at the bank, yada, yada, yada. And we've had studies done, and, we've had people go out and do, and I was like, and then called me racist for saying that. I was like, oh, wow, this is, wow. But then I said, so why don't you come up with an example? And then she's just like, the KKK. I was just like, okay, that's, yeah.
Yeah, oh. It's a logic repeat loop. That's all it is. It's like trying to debate religion with a devout Christian, because you keep asking why, and eventually it just evolves down to because the Bible says.
Yeah.
You can't argue with that, because to them, that's the ultimate answer.
Yep. Well, I think it's hard to tell, anecdotally, everyone says it's worse on Twitter than it's ever been. It certainly looks that way to me. But yeah, I've had unhinged conversations before. Never like this. Some close, but I've been on Twitter for a long time. This is, and I didn't mean to find these. I wasn't looking for these people. Actually, what I did was, because in time posts on occasion, just stuff like, we're discussing this of the Ukraine and this and this. And on my personal account, I said, okay, it looks like Russia just lost 40,000 troops. How is this going to affect things? I can't wait to talk to Lance about it. And then all of a sudden, I got 3, accounts from like a Sergey and this and that saying fake news, you're lying. Just like, hey, what? And I was just, it doesn't usually happen that I draw now. I don't know.
Not me. It's 𝗢𝗍𝗆.
Yeah,
they're the ones that reported
it. So it's a recursive function by because lack of memory. Exactly, Sinister Porpoise has it.
Yeah.
So that's it.
See, I don't think that it's the question of, is Musk encouraging it or even just not squashing the worst of it. I think it's really an issue of there are people who have figured out that the more outrageous your claims, the more money you can generate off of it. And that's all this is. It's pure economics for a lot of these people. I mean, if you go back arguably 20 years ago and tell people that people could literally make a good living of posting videos of how to apply makeup, they'd laugh at you. They think you were insane. But that's the world we live in today. And that kind of stuff goes on. So people get more and more outlandish of, how can I find some way to attract viewership, which will generate revenue for myself? And hate speech, that might do it. If there's enough of a niche population, it'll come in and watch my channel. I think that's what's going on.
Well, and I mean, so Twitter famously doubled their character count. And what they didn't advertise and what most people don't talk about is before they did that, they did a study, and it wasn't to see what would be the most effective for communication or what their audience would appreciate or their customers would appreciate more, not their customers, because customers are the advertisers, not the users. But at any rate, it wasn't what the users would like more. What it was how do we maximize getting people, and they already had figured this out. They'd figured out that the way to maximize engagement was through anger. People will give a heart or whatever. It's like, wow, this is one of the greatest things I've ever seen. This is sweet. This is nice. I'm going to give it a heart, and then they move on. You engage with the stuff you don't like. So what they said was, okay, given that, what's the maximum number or what's the appropriate number of characters that will maximize misunderstanding and the ability to say things in unnuanced ways that can be easily misunderstood, that increases people's aggravation and agitation with each other, and they found that, and it was roughly double so they said, okay, we'll double the character count explicitly, because that was where you maximize what people can say while minimizing understanding and the ability to make an actual nuanced argument. And it's like, that's fucked up. It's literally designed to hit the sweet spot on generating anger and hatred.
Oh, sure.
That's
the thing to remember is how young the internet really is. And then you go back and you look at, starting in about the 1830s when railroads became a big deal. And they changed the face, not just of America, but the whole world. Very similar to what social media and all that is doing. How long did it take before legislation was put in place to regulate just something as simple as railroads, to make them safe, reliable, means of transportation? It's almost a century.
That's an excellent observation.
And I think that's where we're at now. I think people are only just now beginning to realize the dangers and the harm that unregulated social media and internet and so can do. And it's going to take a significantly long time before the outrage, not the fake outrage generated by this social media nonsense, but I mean outrage in real society about the harm this is doing, causes people to finally decide we need to put certain guidelines in place of how this needs to be handled. And I know the first thing everybody's going to do is wave the free speech flag. It's a valid concern, but we're at a point where effectively we have tens of thousands of people screaming fire in a crowded theater.
Exactly.
And we already know that's not safe, so we passed legislation to prohibit it. It's time to take that step in an electronic forum.
Well, and it's I think I'd like to see too, I don't know exactly how you do it, because you got to be a little careful, because it's very easy to say, well, somebody's just giving their opinion and their opinion is dangerous, so we shut them down. But people like Tucker Carlson, who say things that we know for a fact are not true, and by repeating them, they're actually dangerous, and they can indirectly incite violence. You can get stochastic terrorism. You can get why hasn't somebody done something about these Democrats who are doing, and then all of a sudden somebody shoots up a nightclub.
Hillary Clinton's running a child prostitution ring out of the basement of that pizzeria.
Yep.
It's that kind of nonsense. And I think the key that I've argued all along is, if you want to stymie a lot of what is going on in all of these circles, is to do it from an economic standpoint. That's what most people respond to. So if you say something that causes this, you will be fined this uncomfortably large amount.
A number of other countries.
Once that happens, people will start saying, maybe I should watch my P's and Q's before I open that large dripping maw under my nose.
Well, in a number of countries, too, fine not based on the crime, but as much as on the ability of the person to pay. So if you're speeding 50 miles per hour over the speed limit, you get your fine isn't $10 per mile per hour. Your fine is based proportionately on what your income is and how much you can pay. So, a rich, a billionaire gets fined more than somebody who's making $8 an hour and struggling to get by. And I think that's a good idea, because any that kind of, even a small fine to that person is going to be reasonably significant. But to a rich person, it's like not even, you're really only fining poor people. That's it. They're the only ones who actually have to pay the consequences, because to a rich person, if somebody's got, $10 billion, they could pay a $300,000 fine, and they're like, that's, I'd rather not pay it, but hey.
At best, it's an inconvenience.
Yep.
Not a penalty.
Yeah.
Totally agree with you.
I think it was, what was it, Sweden that does that? I don't know. The other one is, I was thinking about gun laws in other countries, and I want to say, is it Switzerland that I always get this wrong? Which country gives out a semi-automatic rifle convertible to automatic basically to every citizen because it's a militia? They have their standing troop.
I believe it's Switzerland.
Switzerland? Okay, I think that's right. Okay, so here's a government that literally forces you to have the weapon. You can't say no because they have a militia. They do a mental health screening, and you are required to have safety classes and training. You're required to keep it locked. They've got all these regulations, and they what is it? They have ballistics profiles, so if the gun is used in a crime, they know whose gun it was, and you're responsible for whatever happens to your gun if you haven't kept it. So it's like, here's a country that actually requires you to have a semi-automatic rifle convertible to automatic, and they look at our gun laws and think we are insane. They're like, Americans are fucking crazy.
Arguably, we are.
Yeah, well, yeah, that goes without saying. So,
this is related but unrelated, so bear with me.
Okay.
One of the things that we want to do in this country is, like, for environmental purposes, we want to start getting lower emission vehicles. And so we pass these regulations where, okay, by 2025, your vehicles that you manufacture can't have these many more, emissions exceeding this level. That's great. How long are older vehicles going to stay on the road? How many cars from the 1960s and 70s do you still see driving on the highways? And not as collector's items, but that's the vehicle that the family owns. Singapore decided they wanted to do something about this, and it was also because they wanted to limit the amount of traffic, because it's a very crowded city, and it's easy to see how quickly they could get into constant gridlock, if they didn't regulate vehicles. So the way vehicles are taxed in Singapore is not on their value, it's on their age. So the older your vehicle is, the higher the rate of taxes are. Such that if you have a vehicle that, I can't remember the exact number, so I'm pulling this kind of out of my ass, but you'll get the gist of what I'm saying. If your car was more than about 5 years old, you really needed to be a very wealthy person to own that car. The unintended consequence of this was twofold. Mm-hmm. One, it meant that people who owned car dealerships were raking in bank because people had to constantly buy new vehicles from them. And then you took the old ones and you just shipped it across the border into Malaya, and Malaysians would buy them and pay good money for it. And the second, much more nefarious issue was that only the rich could actually afford to keep that pace up of having to buy a new car every 2 to 3 years to avoid going to the poorhouse. So cars became a status symbol of the very wealthy. Everybody else had to rely on public transportation. Now, to be, fair and give due credit to Singapore, their public transportation system is phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
But that is a result of doing this, because then you have to placate the masses because nobody wants to walk 20 miles to get to work. So you have to provide a decent public transit system. So it all ties in, but what I'm trying to point out is there are unintended consequences of putting in place certain laws and regulations that don't really get revealed until several years, even several decades after the fact. You see where I'm going with that?
I do, and in fact, I wanted to. So I love economics, and I've studied economics reasonably significantly. I am not an expert, but The Water Thief was an economic book. I am qualified to have some discussions on economic topics, and I actually do think that in many regards, conservatives tend to understand economics a bit better than liberals. So as much as I'm a liberal, I was like, yeah, now don't get me wrong. The only president to balance the budget was Clinton. So it's not like, and conservatives are like, oh, we got to cut spending except on military where we're going to, but like we've cut government spending. If you increase spending in military, that's government. But nonetheless, I remember when Clinton decided that he wanted to do something which I think was absolutely laudable. I think it was a spectacular idea, and I was so proud of the fact that I had voted for a president who would think that this was a good idea and wanted to do this, which was to put every American into their own home. It's like, that's an awesome idea. However, even then I was just like, you cannot just put your hand on the economic scales and not expect that the other side's going to go up in ways that you can't predict. And there was a lot that caused the economic meltdown of 2007, 2008. The bankers, especially companies that were had over-leveraged by more than 30 to 1, any number of real serious problems. But it all started with Bill Clinton deciding that it shouldn't be the economy that decides who gets a home. He's going to put his hands on the scale and make it so that people who can't afford homes are going to start getting homes. That was a really bad decision and led to the economic crisis of 2007, 2008. Best of motives, absolutely best of motives. And there were people who warned him then, mostly the Republicans. Nope.
Can't talk now. Huh? Right. Sorry about that.
No worries. So it was. I think that's a great example of the road to hell paved with good intentions and all.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think there's tons of things like that. It's like, in the USSR, that was one of the issues, is that everybody kind of got their own apartment and their dole that gave them their food. And so you kind of created the perpetual underclass that decided, well, I got everything I need. Why go to work? Why put in any more effort than I have to? Yeah, I have a job, but I can go in and, go to sleep on the job and nothing's going to happen to me. And, that people say, well, that's the flaw of communism. No, that's the flaw of a system that doesn't have consequences. And capitalism, I would argue, at least in the way it has evolved in this country, is almost the opposite effect, which is that if you aren't born into a wealthy family, you're fucked.
Mm. Well, that's true. The best indicator of where you're going to land in the U.S. is where you start.
Yeah.
No,
there has to be some sort of happy medium there, but both sides have kind of an incentive to make sure it doesn't work.
There's a great Russian expression, we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I got to tell you, so my father was a lawyer. He practiced law in 6 languages, and I found that I could learn languages very easy. By the time I graduated high school, I spoke Russian, Japanese, and Spanish. I had studied French for a while, too, lost most of that. By now, I can carry on kind of a conversation in Russian. I can speak Spanish reasonably well. My Japanese is limited to hi, bye, oh, sorry, the very basic,
How much is the udon?
Yeah, exactly. Where's the bathroom kind of thing. And I can't read it anymore. I could only read katakana. Don't get me wrong. I didn't memorize 5,000 characters. Yeah. But and I remember when I was studying Russian, I remember learning the culture. I was one of the last Americans out of, and we've had this discussion before, I was one of the last Americans in the USSR. I was running through Red Square, trying to get onto a bus to get my plane. Nearly got shot. I told you that story. Got on the plane. It was 14 hours. Landed in the U.S. And by the time I landed, there were tanks going down that same street on Red Square because the USSR had just collapsed. So I was one of the last Americans in the Soviet Union. And I remember being very aware of any number of faults of the Russian system, of the Soviet Union, but also seeing how much pride these people had and seeing a lot of their culture and what they developed for art, and realizing that I thought it was something that they could be proud of. And I said, despite the obvious failures and how glad I was that the Soviet Union had fallen, I was like, I really think that the Russian people still have a culture and a country that they can be proud of. And I look at it now, and I don't think that anymore. And that may be unfair because we've had this discussion, and it's the leadership. And you and I both know about how the propaganda has been done for a very long time. These are oppressed and brainwashed people. But I see what they're doing in Ukraine, and I remember what it was like for me as a kid learning the language and being proud that I was learning the language because they were our enemies, and I was either going to learn the language of our enemies, which would make me useful, or I was learning the language of people who my government said were our enemies, but were really our friends, in which case I really wanted to know the language. In either case,
sure,
I knew I was doing something positive by learning the language. And now I look at it, I'm almost ashamed that I speak it. I'm almost ashamed. And Starsky and I have spoken it on occasion back and forth. I feel a little bad speaking it because I'm aware he'd rather speak Ukrainian. But I'm almost ashamed that I can speak the language, if that makes any sense. And yeah.
See, I look at it from a curious historical perspective. If you discount the idiot Hollywood romanticization of Imperial Russia, and you look at it for what it was a horribly oppressive and bleak world for anybody living in that country, unless you were one of the nobility. And then along comes the Bolshevik Revolution. And they changed things. They changed things significantly for the better for the average Russian citizen. But as is the case with many revolutions, the people who come to power immediately start deciding that, well, I'm still a good revolutionary, but I'm going to assume some of the affectations of the same aristocracy I overthrew, because I deserve it, because I'm working so hard and I accomplished so much in bringing freedom to you people. And I think that's where Russia and America, to an extent, diverge. Because Russia, after their revolution, migrates back into an aristocracy ruling situation. Whereas the United States, simply because, in large part, Washington in particular, but the other founding fathers to a lesser extent, all realized that at some point the need to turn over the reins of power to younger people who are thinking new thoughts, to allow the evolution of the state into something that fits with the constantly changing times, is important. And that foundation is really what sets us apart from a country like, say, Russia. I think that's one of the key things. And I think it's a bit of arrogance on our part to think that we were somehow just, we're God's chosen, natural selection, we were going to be better. All you have to do is just change a couple tiny elements of that equation and say, okay, Washington decides, yeah, I'll be king. And, Adams is going to be the Duke of New England. And you see what I'm getting at?
No, I do.
And the next thing you know, we're right back in the same situation with the rest of these assholes.
So it was yeah.
And the argument I would make is that today we are starting to transition back onto that same course, in that we are allowing wealth and power to concentrate into the hands of, in large part, hereditary people, people who are handing down their wealth from one generation to the next and concentrating more and more of that wealth and power into their own families. So we may not have official dukes of California or dukes of Texas, but let's be honest here. In large part, we actually do, because we've allowed that transition to occur.
Well, and money buys nothing if it doesn't buy freedom from consequences. If I'm going to get sued for anything, if I'm going to get the police after me for anything, I'd rather have $10 million to help defend myself with than not. And we all know that that's how it works. So the people who have money can buy their own justice, whether it's buying a political action committee that legally bribes congressmen and senators to do whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And Romney was the perfect example of this, aside from the fact that Romney was paying less as a percentage of his income than his secretary was on the year that he ran for president. One of the things he said was, well, I pay what the government tells me to. And, so he made it sort of sound like, almost a Trump defense, which is I'd be an idiot to pay more than I have to, which, by the way, is fine. I do get that. But what he left out was that his company had successfully gotten the marginal tax rate explicitly for his bracket reduced through government lobbying. And it turns out, and this was a shock for me to learn, but it turns out that people like Mitt Romney can afford better lobbyists than poor people. It just works out that way somehow.
No.
I know. And it's the quality of the lobbyists, not the quality of the argument, that determines what gets done. So I wish we had some form of political action committee or finance reform in the end. I don't know how we do that because the people who control that are the ones that would lose the money. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh dear
So
Lord.
now that we've identified all the problems in the world,
yeah. Somebody should put us in charge. I think we got. Well, that's the thing.
Somebody once said that to me. He said, "Oh, Lance, you just want to be in charge of everything." I said, "Nope, just the opposite." Because I know if given the unfettered power to make those decisions, most of the ones I would make would be wrong.
Well, and not only that, I get all the time, I get accused of being a know-it-all. You know, it's like, oh, you're a know-it-all. Why don't you just do things? Like, I'm not a know-it-all, but I can fake it really well. And the reason is because all I do is criticize the systems that exist. And I sit there and think about it. If you think I have that many answers, it's like, no, the know-it-all has the answers, right? I'm sitting here doing the easy shit. I'm just like, this is what's wrong. This is what's wrong. This is what's wrong. And I think more often than not, I got it. More often than not, I got it. But I'm not a know-it-all, because the know-it-all is going to sit there and say, this is how we fix it. And I got some general ideas how you fix it. How do you fix it? Get the money out of Washington. Boom. That's not an answer. You know that's not an answer. I know that's not. It's right, I think. I think that is the answer,
nice,
but it's not.
It ain't going to happen.
Well, it may, but it's an idea, right? It's a concept. The answer is the process. The answer is how do we do that? And I'm just like, oh, listen, I could solve that, you know, but oh, dear Lord, I gotta go. You know what? I gotta. Yeah. It's real easy to get reasonably well educated on topics and then say, oh, this is the problem. This is the problem. This is the problem. The answers are a lot harder. So, speaking of, you and I had seen, and I've forgotten his name. Let me look it up. There's this guy that's been making the rounds, and I'm conflicted about him. And you and I have talked about him a bit. Let me snag his name again.
I think it's 𝐍𝐢𝐜𝐴?
Yeah, something like that. Peter 𝗍𝐢𝐜𝐴. Peter 𝗍𝐢𝐜𝐴. So, a couple things about this guy. Now, I've found actually videos going back 4 years, and include actually 8 years, and including one that predicted the invasion of Ukraine, and a few other things that he said. He is a geopolitical commentator, a purported expert on all things geopolitical. I had never heard of him until a little less than a year ago. Somebody sent me a video he did on China. And I got to tell you, in some ways it made me feel really good, because I've been a little worried about where China's going. It's like, nope, China's done. China will be gone in 10 years. Here's why. And he gave this reasoning, and I was just like, you know, I not an expert, but I know enough to know what he's talking about. And to the best of my understanding, he's right. So maybe he's onto something. So I've seen a number of his videos now, and I've got some concerns. I've got some things that I've seen about, but I sent you a couple of his videos. Again, and he's recently really become popular. He's taken off. I've had... I mean, I'd literally, up until, say, maybe a month ago, had never heard of this guy, never seen anything. And then suddenly the YouTube algorithm, I'm flooded with, 3, 4, 5, 6 of his clips every day. So yeah, somebody's found a way to manipulate the algorithm to push his agenda. Well, the algorithm is an interesting thing, and I've been, especially recently, doing a lot more learning about it. And it is a fickle thing, and it's the way it works is very interesting. And you do often get, there's a lawyer by the name of 𝗍𝗺𝗺 who was an early supporter of this channel. I think he actually gave us our very first super chat. We've had him on a number of times. Our channel was actually ahead of his for a short while. He exceeded us. And then one day, we wake up and we find out that he has gotten, in a 24-hour period, and he had maybe a couple thousand subs. He got 10,000 subs in a 24-hour period. Now, the first reaction people are going to think is, well, gee, he must have done something. No, yeah, something in the algorithm suddenly put him in the top, and he was getting play in the algorithm. And then he gets another 10,000. Then he gets another 10,000. All of a sudden, he's at 100,000. He's at 200,000 after 2 weeks. And this is a guy who's been doing it for 2 years, and had gotten maybe 5,000 or 6,000 or whatever he did before that. The algorithm is fickle, and it's weird, and if you keep at it, eventually, usually you hit a topic and that's what happened with him. It was the women's soccer. He had hit a topic that really caught people's attention, and it went. And I think for this guy, I think it's both Ukraine and China, and because when he was talking about China, he was talking about China and COVID. Now that China is really suffering COVID, I think it's that video that took When people see that, if they watch anything more than 15 minutes of it, he gets boosted in the algorithm because it's so. I think it's a. I just realized it sounded like you were suggesting that somebody had done, and you weren't. So I just realized I probably took that wrong. At any rate, so what are your thoughts? You've now seen a couple of his videos. I have some thoughts, but yours are probably going to be more educated than mine on this.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. My thoughts on him are this. He knows his stuff. A lot of what he says is very cogent, very well thought out, very accurate. What he does slip up on a couple of things, and that's fine, everybody does. What bothers me about him, and this is just me, I'm sure there are other people who won't view it from this perspective, but the thing about him that bothers me is that he speaks with such absolute confidence about this is what's going to happen. And it's one of those, when you sit down with the fortune teller, it's almost as much about how they present themselves and how then what their answers to your questions are. And I think that's kind of what's going on with this guy, is that he's selling himself as this huge supreme authority who knows his stuff. And again, I don't want to undersell him. He does know his stuff quite well. But you're left with this takeaway that, oh, this is the new Svengali. He knows everything. He'll answer every question about everything. You know, what's little Johnny going to have for lunch tomorrow? Ziha knows. You know, that kind of overconfidence bugs me. And I know I slip up, but I try, when I say things about what I think is going on, I try to render it as explicitly, this is my opinion. This is why I think this is the case. I try, if I can, to point out other elements that contradict what I'm saying so you can try to form a rational opinion of your own based on those facts. I don't think there is an empirical truth when you're talking about a lot of this stuff, because it is largely based on opinion and subjective analysis. And that's why I am uncomfortable with him. I still enjoy watching him. I will admit, I've taken things he said and I've echoed them because they reflect my own views, and I try to use facts that he presents, and he does present a fair number of facts, and I try to use those to back that up. So, as with everything, it's one of those, take this with a grain of salt, ...
I think that's it. I think when I first saw a video, I knew enough to realize that he knew what he was talking about. So I'm sitting there going, okay, he's not pulling this out of his ass. He's just not. And I liked that confidence because it imbued me with confidence. Have you actually
looked into what his CV is?
I have not, actually. I did briefly.
It's an impressive CV. It's an impressive CV. It's worth just looking it up. Just take a quick glance at it. The guy has been around the block and knows what he's talking about.
So I could recognize that. And then when he had this confidence, I really liked it because also, and let's be honest, right? So I remember I was watching another channel. And somebody was talking about the Putin on LinkedIn, the assassination thing, like $1 million if you kill Putin, and they put the wanted dead or alive on LinkedIn. And so somebody starts saying that, and the way they start saying it, I was like, wait a minute. This is how I said it on my show 2 nights ago. And then the guy paused and was like, I think that's a violation of terms of service. Like, that's my fucking joke. And the guy actually then said, yeah, that was actually Nick. I was watching in time. He goes, that was hilarious. I was like, okay, I got credit for it. I don't need to get credit for it. I'm so thrilled to just be like somebody watched enough.
There's some things you don't want to take credit for.
Hey, it was a good joke. But when we watch something like this, we do it for 2 reasons. One, so that we can learn and get assurance and we feel better about the world because we feel like we understand it. But 2 is to echo it back to other people. So we can say, and there are things that you've said, and when I was arguing with 𝗦𝗸𝐺 people on Twitter that I was telling you about. Like every now and then I was just like, well, wait a minute, what about this, 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 and this, which is stuff I learned from you. So part of the reason that we listen to experts is so that we can echo it back and, you know, kind of feel a little empowered ourselves. So he makes that really easy because he's got so much confidence. Like, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to tell you where every country on this planet is going to be in 10 years. Here, 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 here. And there's no, it depends on whether A or B or C happens. It's just, this is it. It's deterministic. I am telling you how it's going to be.
This is the truth. I
know. So at first, I found that very appealing. But that was only for about one video, maybe 1.5. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. My concern is this. I can tell he's an expert. I can tell he knows what he's talking about. But throughout my entire life, the thing that I've learned is the people who really know their shit, the more they learn about a subject, the more they hedge, guard, and really kind of are very careful about the claims that they make to fact. And for example, yeah, exactly. When we talk to you, I say, you know, what do you think is going to happen in the future? You say, okay, first of all, it's the future. I don't know. A couple of things could happen based on, if A happens, we'll probably see B. If Z happens, we'll probably see this. But those are also contingent on a couple things that we're just guessing at. Those are the answers you give, and that's through a tremendous amount of experience in this area. And it's been my experience that anybody who knows, the more somebody knows on a topic, the more they answer like that. So this guy is answering the exact opposite of...
Well, there's a reason for it.
Yes.
Because you can't monetize doubt and uncertainty. In the current environment, with a very chaotic... No, I'm serious.
I know,
in the current world environment of chaos, uncertainty, people want to feel assured. And when you present yourself that way, they feel assured. So it racks up viewers. It's also the way that if you are in a teaching environment, and that's part of what his background is, you don't want to stand up in front of your students and say, well, I don't know for sure, but I think it's this. You know, eventually somebody's going to go to the boss at the school and say, he doesn't really seem to know as much as he thinks or says he thinks he knows, you know? And so you have to present yourself with this air of enormous confidence, and it sells. It's what gets you, you know, endorsements, it gets you employed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a different personality. It's a different approach to the world. And it's perhaps a valid one for some people, but it's not the way I think, and it's not what makes me comfortable. That's why, as I said, I like what he says, but I also dislike what he says. So it's a mixed bag for me.
Well, and that's sort of where I am now. I'm also of the impression that if somebody came up, the way he presents himself, he's so sure, if somebody came up to him with very good evidence that he's wrong, it seems to me he would just entrench and say, no, I am not wrong, period, end of discussion. So it seems like he seems closed-minded to me.
Actually, there are a couple of his videos where he comes out and admits, I was incorrect in my assessment on X. Now, it's well after the fact, and the evidence is already in, you know. Well, we found him guilty, and the appeals have gone through, and we've executed him. So now you can comfortably admit, yeah, maybe I was wrong when I said he wasn't guilty.
Well, at some point, I think it would be worthwhile you and I maybe grabbing one of his videos or two. I like his China video. The Ukraine one's interesting, but maybe grabbing one or two. We'll take, you know, if you're free, whatever, we'll take some time. We'll do a show. We'll play it. Play a few minutes of it and then stop and digest what he's doing. I think he's worth, suddenly everybody's talking about him, so he's worth knowing, understanding, and thinking about. I agree. I've reached the point where I find that assurance, and I think, like, in the fact, like, after the fact is one thing, but if he's making a prediction and somebody says, well, here's all this evidence you haven't considered, he seems closed-minded. He's so sure of himself, and it is off-putting, and it's hard to feel like I can trust what he's saying. And again, it's based on a lifetime of experience, realizing that the people who are the most educated on a subject are actually the most unsure, at least about the sort of high ends of the subject. I could expect him to sit there and talk about the basics and say, this is how governments work, and, you know, state it as absolute fact. That's one thing. You know, we can all state, you know, this is what a democracy is. We know that that's a fact. There are facts that we can state. But when it gets to this high end prediction stuff, and it's just he's stating it with the same sense of the So we actually reached out to him. We may reach out to him again.
Interesting.
He's been on a few smaller channels. There's a possibility of, so I don't know. I know one or two people who might be able to get a hold of him, so we'll see. At a minimum, we'll take a look at some of his videos, and we'll make fun of him, and we'll say terrible things about him. And then if we get him on, we'll hide all those videos. We'll private the videos so that he doesn't realize that we were making fun of him.
So I'll throw out one interesting anecdote that's indirectly connected to all this, and I don't know its validity, but this is the story I've heard, is that Nelson Rockefeller, when he was going to be hiring people, would take them out to an expensive lunch at some restaurant somewhere. And there were two, and I can't remember what the second is, but there were two things he would do during the, quote, interview, which it wasn't advertised as an interview, but it was just having lunch. He would observe during the course of this lunch that would help him decide whether or not this was somebody he wanted to pursue hiring. And one of those is he'd insist that, we're going to have steaks because the steaks here in this restaurant are some of the most incredible steaks in the world. You just have to have this steak. And, you know, he was buying, so you say, sure, sounds great. And he would watch. And if you sprinkled salt on your steak before tasting it, you're out. You never got a return interview. And his thesis behind this was that until you taste it, you don't really know whether that piece of meat needs salt or not. Your experience may tell you that 99.9 times out of 100, you do need to put salt on it, but still, you need to check before you jump. And that, I think, is to some extent what we're going on about here with the 𝐶 guy, is that he's salting his steak before he tastes it.
I like that one. I think that's an interesting, well, especially if I know I'm murdering the metaphor, but, you know, it's like if he's already said to, by the way, that they're great steaks, presumably they don't need to be, you know, modified or seasoned on top of whatever they, oh dear Lord.
He didn't care whether or not you put salt on it. It was whether you tasted it before you put salt.
That's interesting. Well, he's an interesting cat, and I think he's
I'll grant you that.
Yeah. Well, he's not dumb. He's not dumb. And I'm usually a fan of people who aren't dumb. So I'll at some point do a little more research into him. But
you put up with me.
Yeah. Oh, the humility. Yeah. Oh, the humanity. I still remember, you know, Lance, I think we need to rename the show. I've been trying to figure out what we're going to rename it. Well, how about Waste of Time, Nick? Friggin' son of a...
I still advocate for it.
I don't forget these things, Lance. I don't forget these things.
You shouldn't.
Apparently neither do
Tells
you.
You a lot about me.
Yeah, neither do you. You got me really good later when we had on, and oh, God, you were murdering me in front of Starsky. Thanks for that. You were still pissed about that hippo comment. I know that's what that was all about.
Okay,
Oh, yeah. Okay. That was. Listen, it was a Xandering who was talking about you having relations with a hippo. Okay. I don't.
Okay.
I was staying out of that conversation. I was neutral.
Wasn't me.
I'm a liberal. I'm okay with the relations that you choose to have with consenting whatever kind of species a hippo is. I don't judge. Oh dear Lord.
Someday I'm going to have to find Bob and let him know that he's now internet famous.
Yeah. Well, didn't he die of rectal electrocution? Wasn't that?
Well, the hippo did. Again, that
Bob
wasn't
was the
me.
one who
this
was.
is my
Yeah.
friend who worked in the artificial insemination business.
Yes. That's right, and we were deliberately misconstruing it to be you. I recall that now. That
I would hope you remember that part.
In hindsight, that may have been slightly unfair. Just slightly.
Okay.
Oh dear
Just
Lord!
Slightly, a little bit.
Yeah. So, exactly. Oh dear Lord!
That's a few hundred dead among friends.
Oh my God. Oh, so all right. Well, we're gonna have Starsky on tomorrow. My guess is we're gonna have some stuff to talk about. So I hope you'll be joining us for that.
Oh yeah, a lot going on.
Yeah, and I don't know. Hopefully the new weapons. What?
Actually, it may have balloons in it too. You never know.
Yeah. Well, and somebody had. I had seen a thing, and so if you haven't joined our Discord, I think most people watching have, but if you haven't joined our Discord, you can find what we're doing, what's coming up, and also the news that we're curating on the Discord. We do the news on Mondays. We do the rundown. We also do breaking news when it happens. And we did like when both when Turkey got hit with the earthquake and when the train wreck in Palestine, Ohio happened. We went with those live, and I'm proud of that because they've been important stories that have been continuing. So you can find out about that on the Discord. But we also have we've been following some more evidence that it looks like they're getting ready to send the F-16s to Ukraine, which would be interesting. How much of a would those? Jesus, I almost caught myself saying how much of a game changer, but. How much of a game?
Those words.
Oh, sorry. It has to be significant if they get F-16s. Now, I mean, F-16s aren't the most modern aircraft, but they beat, I think, just about anything Russia's deploying there. They haven't, and they've refused to deploy their own 5th gen. I think, if I recall correctly, is that about right?
It's a very good, I think, 4th generation. The categorization of what is a generational indicator in fighters is debatable amongst whoever you're talking to, but it's not current top of the line, but it's a very good from previous generation. That said, I think a fair amount of how good it will be and how useful it will be is dependent on what ordnance we give them to use with it, because in many ways aircraft these days are an integration of the airframe itself and the ordnance it carries. And so if we don't give them the more advanced missiles to go with it, it's nowhere near as capable as it could be. The second part of that equation is, what are they going to use those F-16s for? And in certain roles, depending on what ordnance is provided, they may be good. They may be absolutely horrible to use in certain roles if they aren't given the right ordnance to deploy with that aircraft. So it's hard to say what it will do until we find out all the details of what that transfer will entail.
I'm disappointed in you. You haven't listened to the Zihan or Zohan or whatever his name is school. Nick, Those are some of the most modern fighters that you would see in the region. If those get to Ukraine, Russia is over. Russia will collapse within 10 years if you send just 5
10 years, I'll
F-16s
grant you that. 10 days, that's another question.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It was a delight as always. Thank you to the audience. It was time after time. Ooh, that is a good one. Doorknob head. Time after time.
Somebody just got home, and I need to help unload the car. So.
Thank you so much, and I will see you tomorrow. Good night, and good night to everyone in the live chat. Have a great night. Bye.